Okay, Monday afternoon. We're going to cover today's slides 21 to 33, dealing with diluted earnings per share. Okay, so we have the concept of basic earnings per share. Basic earnings per share is actual. Okay. Now, diluted earnings per share is basically what if. So earnings dilution occurs when additional shares are issued without the proportionate increase in the level of earnings. So our net income stays the same, but because we have shares that are going to dilute the earnings per share, we have to calculate that in. So it's diluted EPS. So diluted earnings per share is hypothetical. It's a what-if calculation meant to reflect any potential for earnings dilution because of dilutive potential ordinary shares from existing share contracts. Okay, so we've got to look into the different options that are out there. Okay, and are they going to dilute the earnings per share from the current common shareholders? Now, so starting on slide 21. All right, so again, diluted EPS reflects the hypothetical earnings dilution that occurs if dilutive options are purchased to purchase shares are exercised. Okay, so we're going to get into options. Okay. That's basically where a company allows employees to buy shares at a cost that's less than what they're actively trading at. Okay, so you get an immediate discount. Now, you might have dilutive convertible senior securities, okay, that are outstanding and converted into common shares. Okay. So we have things like debt, when bonds can be converted into common shares. Okay. So what's going to happen there is you're going to have now more shares on the market. Okay. Now we might have some contingent issuable ordinary shares that are issued based on a contingency. Okay, so if company XYZ meets this, okay, then they have to issue new shares. Okay. So any shares actually that have been issued during the year because of any of the above, okay, so whether they be options, convertible senior securities, or contingent shares, okay, we have to calculate it as if those have been issued at the beginning of the fiscal year. Okay, but a little bit different than our basic EPS calculation, which requires us to take an average. Okay. So diluted EPS is meant to be the worst case scenario. So dilutive elements cause a decrease in the earnings per share. We're going to get into an example. Okay. If it's dilutive, we want to include it in the diluted EPS. If it's anti-dilutive, we exclude it. Again, we're only worried about what if, the worst case scenario. Anti-dilutive makes things better. Okay. So let's get into our diluted calculation. Okay. So the first thing that we need to look at, again, I said this before, are options. Okay. So options, if you don't know what those are, okay, that is where a company will say to their management team, we will give you options that have an exercise price of, let's say, $15. The current market price is $40. So what management will say is, they'll say, okay, we like the management team in place. If we meet these sales figures, we're going to give you options, meaning you have the option to buy company shares at $15 a piece. When the shares are currently trading at 40, that would be your in the money. Okay, why? Because you can buy at 15, and the next day sell at 40. Okay, that is $25 profit per share immediately. Okay, so that's in the money. That's dilutive. Now, if it's the other way, exercise price of 40 with a market price of or sorry, an exercise price of 15, you'd be crazy to buy that. Okay, might as well go buy it on the open market. Okay. So again, options are dilutive when they're in the money. So in this case, it would be in the money. So option adjustments are based on the treasury stock method, where the proceeds are assumed to be used to reacquire and retire common shares at the average market price during that period. So let's take a look at our example here. So let's just say that we're management, and at the beginning of the year, management came to us and gave us stock options. We could buy, again, buy for 15, and it's trading at whatever. In this case, it's 40. Okay, yeah, you know what, we've got some extra money in our pocket. We want to exercise these options. Okay. Now, hypothetically, again, the options are hypothetical because they have not yet taken place, but they want to show the reader what could happen. So in this case here, okay, let's just say that management decides we're gonna go buy 2,000 shares. So 2,000 times 15 bucks. That's going to be $30,000. So how would a company record that? Well, they debit cash and credit common shares. Okay, that's really simplistic. It's actually a little bit more than that, but that's the gist of it. Okay. Now, so they're going to buy. They're going to sell their own shares at $15 a piece. Then they're going to take that $30,000, okay, and they're going to go buy as many shares as they can with that $30,000. So if they have $30,000, so they're going to sell 2,000 shares at 15 bucks a piece. Then they're going to take that $30,000, and when the current price is trading at 40, they're going to go in the open market and they're going to buy back 750 shares. So the result is they're going to sell 2,000, they're going to buy back 750. So the net increase for dilution is 1,250. 2,000 minus 750, 1,250. Now this number is important because it's going to be the diluted share figure. Okay. Now, we also have contingently issuable shares. Okay, so this is on page 1423. So if necessary conditions are not satisfied and the contingency period has not yet expired when calculating the diluted EPS, we want to include the following. So dilutive shares are included based on the shares issuable if the end of the reporting period or the end of the contingency period. Okay, well, okay, fine. Yeah, you're going to have to read through. There's a good example here on page 1423. So we want to include from the beginning of the reporting period of the date of the contingent share agreement was met. If later, there's no change in the numerator. Okay. So for example, now let's take a look at the example on page 1423. Okay. Now it says, for example, assume that Hyperforce acquired GH Resources for $15 million early in 01. The purchase and sale of the agreement specified that if GH core operations earned at least $4 million per year for 3 years, the former shareholders of GH would be entitled to 100,000 common shares in Hyperforce. So GH assumes operation and earns $5.8 million during 01. Okay, but the agreement is they got to hit $4 million for 3 years. So if the contingency, which is earnings performance, were to have concluded at the end of 01, and it would have been for 1 year only, the shares would have been issuable. Okay. Therefore, the 100,000 common shares are included in the denominator of the diluted EPS calculation and backdated to the start of January 1st, 01. Now, these shares are included in diluted EPS even though the agreement states that 3 years of earnings must be earned to satisfy the contingency. That is, all that is required for inclusion in diluted EPS is that the necessary conditions are met, as if the contingency period ended at the end of 01. So on the other hand, the agreement was written to require cumulative earnings of $12 million before the shares were issuable. Okay? Then the shares would not have been included in diluted EPS at the end of 01 because the condition had not yet been met. So this is kind of get confusing. So in this case here, we're not going to include it. Why? Because they did not get that cumulative earning of $12 million. They only have 5.8. Now, if they would have hit it in that target that first year, it would have been as if they had hit it on January 1st. So that's an example that I find that sometimes it's these contingently issuable shares are the most difficult, and we'll do a couple questions on them. Okay. So there is a good example of this on page 1424. It summarizes potential adjustments. Now, treasury options. Options, if we're using the treasury stock method, we don't change the numerator, but we change the denominator. By the denominator is the bottom number. Okay, net income divided by shares. Okay, this is the denominator. Okay. So again, if we're having options, obviously we would increase the denominator because there's more shares being issued. Same with contingently issuable shares. Okay. In this case here, we're going to increase the denominator by the increase in the number of shares issued. Okay. Now we also have things like convertible bonds. Okay. So let's look at an example of convertible bonds. I gotta find one here. So convertible bonds would be a dilutive senior security. So bond and preferred share adjustments are based on the if converted method. Okay, and this is slide 2029. Okay, following on page 1423 as well. So under this method, the numerator and the denominator of the EPS ratio are adjusted as though the securities have been converted at the beginning of the period. Okay. So you've got to remember, when we are converting either bonds or preferred shares, we're going to have to adjust both the numerator and the denominator. Okay, the numerator is going to change. Okay, why? Because you're going to save from paying after-tax interest. You don't have to worry about paying the interest on a bond anymore because you've converted it to shares. Okay. So in this case here, let's just say the net income was $10 million. Preferred dividends were, I don't know, $1 million. That would be quite a bit, but and then let's just say the number of shares that we had were let's just make it easy, 9 million shares. So again, if it's options, what's going to happen? This number is going to increase. If it's contingently issuable shares, this number is going to increase. Well, these numbers are going to stay the same. But if we are taking a dilutive security and converting it to common shares, we have two changes. First of all, let's look at a bond. Okay? So if we're converting $1 million bonds, $1 million of bonds into, say, $1 million of bonds. Okay. And the interest rate is 10%. So that interest is going to be $100,000. Okay. Now, our tax rate, let's just say our tax rate is 20%. So the after-tax cost of that interest payment would be $80,000. Now, that also represents, now, so if we take that bond and convert it into shares, let's just say it converts into $1 million of bonds, converts into 200,000 shares. What's going to happen? Well, now we're going to have more shares in this case, plus the 200,000 shares that it converts. But we're also going to save interest. We're going to save $80,000 of after-tax interest payments. Why? Because we converted it from a bond that pays interest to a common share that doesn't pay interest. Okay. The common shareholder will get a dividend, but that's part of the EPS calculation. Okay. Now, we also gain some money because we don't have to pay a preferred dividend. Okay. So before we had 10,000 minus 1 million. So if we no longer have preferred shares, that's another example. So if we no longer have preferred shares, the same type of thing happens. If we had, let's just say those $1 million of preferred shares, converts 1 to 1. So now instead of preferred, now we don't have any more preferred shares. Now we have $1 million common shares, okay, which are valued at $1 a piece. So now our shares are going to increase by another million. Sorry. So that's an example of dilutive features. Now, a good example of this is on page 1427. Okay, so notice how, let's just go right to diluted EPS. So we calculate the basic EPS fairly simplistic. So we take our data from above. That's our starting point. Is always the current EPS. It's current basic EPS. Now we have to make an adjustment. Why? Because in this case here, you can see we have options. Okay, great. So I'm going to do an example here. I'm just going to follow along. Our basic EPS is 450,000. Okay, so the earnings available to the common shareholder. Again, this is from page 1427. 450,000. Weighted average of common shares is, in this case, 20,000. And the basic EPS is 22.50. Okay. Now let's get into that diluted portion. So what's the scenario here? We have convertible debentures, so convertible debt. $1 million at maturity value, 10% interest paid annually, issued at par, converts into 10 common shares for each $1,000 of bond maturity at the option of the investor. Okay, so right off the bat, okay, it's how much. What's that going to convert to? Well, if I take my $1 million par value and divide it by, so I'm going to go 1 million. That's where it felt. My hands are falling down. 1 million divided by 1,000. Okay. or sorry, 1,000. Why? Because we have a total of $1 million of bonds, okay, and we're going to issue 10 common shares for each $1,000 unit of bond maturity. So 1 million divided by 1,000 gives us 1,000 units, then times 10 equals 10,000 shares. So we're going to add 10,000 shares for this debt. Okay, so we'll add 10,000 shares. We also got to remember we're not going to pay interest either, so we're going to have an interest savings as well. Okay, so we'll come back to that later. I want to follow the textbook. So the first thing that I like to do is I like to do options. Okay, do they have options? There are executive stock options outstanding allowing for the purchase of 4,000 common shares at exercise price of $50. The average market value of the common shares during the period was $125. All right, so they're definitely going to want to go ahead with this. Okay. So the earnings available to the common shareholder is still $450. But instead of having 20,000 shares outstanding, they're going to have more. How much more? Well, 2,000 times the exercise price of $50 is 100,000. So how much are they going to buy back? So they got $100,000, and then they're going to take that 100,000 and buy back shares on the market, which are currently trading at, in this case, 125. So 800. They're going to buy 800 shares. Now, why did I use 2,000? It should be 4,000. 4,000 times 50, that's going to be $200,000 coming in, and then that 200 is going to get them 60. Okay. So as a result, the net amount, okay, 4,000 minus 1,600, okay, for the shares issued minus the shares retired, 2,400. So now you can see what happens, right? So now we have options that resulted in the same amount available to the common shareholder of 450, but now we have to take that 450 and divide it up amongst the additional option holders. So we'll have 22,004 or 20, yeah, sorry, 2,000. 22,400. Okay. So 22,000. So now you can see what's happening. It's diluting your earnings per share. So now we'll go 450 divided by 22,400. We got it down. It's now down at 20,009. We as investors, we don't like that. Okay. Now let's look at our conversion of debt. So from this calculation here, okay, we already knew that we're going to add in 10,000 shares. So now we go from 20 plus the 2,400. Now we add in another 10. Now we're down to 30. We're up to 32,400. Okay. Now we've got to remember with convertible debt. Yeah. However, we might be converting debt to shares, which is going to increase the number of shares. But we also no longer have to pay out interest, okay, on that debt. So in this case here, how much is the interest savings going to be? And that's always going to be calculated after tax. So we pay 10% interest. So 10 million, 1 million times 10% is $100,000 for the year. Okay. So $100,000 of interest. We don't have to pay that anymore because we converted that debt to common shares. So yeah, again, well, we did increase the number of common shares now. Okay. We get a savings on not having to pay that convertible debt. So what's the savings? 100,000 times 1 minus the tax rate. So the tax rate in this case is 25%. As a result, we will have a savings of, so an interest avoided, or interest savings of $75,000. Okay, so now you can see what's happening, right? We go from 450. Okay, we still remain at 450, but now we're adding in another 75. And again, it depends on how you want to subtotal this after every issuance. Okay. So I just like to go 450 plus 75 times 525. So 525 divided by 32,400. Now it's gone down to $16.20. Again, dilutive. There's all these dilutive measures that are in place that are bringing down our basic EPS. Okay. Now, lastly, we might have had convertible preferred shares. Okay. So in this case here, let's go take a look. We have 1,000 shares are issued and outstanding. So these are preferred shares. $150 annual per share dividend is cumulative and callable at $1,200 per share. Okay. So they convert into common shares on a 5-to-1 basis until 05 and then 10-to-1 after. Okay. So 1,000 preferred shares are going to translate into 10,000 common shares issued, right? Why? Because it's 10 for 1. Okay. Convertible preferred shares. So as a result, we're going to now have, instead of 32,400, we're going to add in another 10,000 shares. For every 1 share, 1 preferred share, you get 10 common shares. So now we're at 42,400. Okay, great. But we also got to remember one more thing. Okay. Since we've converted the preferred shares to common shares, we no longer have to pay the preferred dividend. So how much are dividends avoided? Well, we're going to avoid paying $150,000 of dividends. Okay. So as a result, we have $675,000 that's now available to the common shareholder. Why? Again, because that preferred dividend, right? It doesn't have to be paid out. So you're saving $150,000 there. So you can see what happened. You started with $450. You avoid paying the interest. So now you have $525 available to the common shareholder. By converting those preferred shares, you no longer have to pay a preferred dividend. So that other $150 now goes all to the common shareholder. Okay. So at the end, all you got to do is, now what? 675 divided by 42,400. Again, we're grinding this thing down. It's diluted all the way down to 5092. If you can do these 3 scenarios, okay, also be very familiar with contingent shares. Okay, so based on a contingency, because that can dilute as well. But if you can get all 4, you'll have no problem come the quiz and come the exam. So again, that'll take us to Wednesday. And up to slide, I'd say slide 2032. Okay, so I'd like you to, again, for today, try TR22, TR25, and TR26. Tomorrow, TR29 and A20-9. Okay. And on Wednesday's class, what we'll do is we'll go through a couple of these questions together, and you'll be able to learn and see, you know what, the diluted question is not that difficult. Okay. So again, test these out on your own, read ahead, and again, we'll have another video on Wednesday. All right, have a good day, and if you still owe me some of those quizzes, make sure you get them in. Talk to you on Wednesday.